Hey friends, Toby here. Before we pop into our episode, I wanted to let you know about an upcoming free workshop I'm offering on April 24th and another session on April 28th. And I will be talking about how to write a volunteer recruitment appeal that converts. And I'll be taking you through my very simple framework for writing something that is above and beyond what we usually see in our recruitment appeals. We want to help you really reach the hearts and minds of potential volunteers. And we think good copywriting is the way to get there. So I'm going to teach you how to do it. I'm also going to share with you some do's and don'ts about calls to action. So I hope you join us. All you need to do is click on the link below in the show notes or go to volpro.net/miracle messaging. And I hope to see you there.
Welcome to the Volunteer Nation podcast, bringing you practical tips and big ideas on how to build, grow, and scale volunteer talent. I'm your host, Tobi Johnson, and if you rely on volunteers to fuel your charity, cause, membership, or movement, I made this podcast just for you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Volunteer Nation podcast. I'm your host, Tobi Johnson, and today I have such a treat. We're going to talk about best practices and community spirit with Volunteering New Zealand. I have two of my newfound friends from Volunteering New Zealand who I met back in January when I was in Wellington and presenting and facilitating a session on their best practice guidelines and how we can improve the volunteer experience at each step of the volunteer journey. So we did a facilitated journey mapping session. We had such a good time, and it was just really fun to hang out and learn more. And, we feature national standards and work like this on the pod. A few years ago, we had folks from Australia in episode 131 and 132. We talked about the national strategy with Zach Reimers and Sarah Wilson. And so it's something that always fascinates me because I believe I have seen through these different standards and reviewing them, the way that different countries approach volunteer engagement and volunteer mobilization. And in particular, it's so interesting how these often will reflect the community or the way of being of folks in that country. And I think in New Zealand, that is absolutely true. When we were facilitating our session, I was really asking folks to think about what breaks or builds community. And I believe that the way that these best practice guidelines were developed was very much a community-centric way, a volunteer-centric way. So I want to dig into that a little bit. In the event that you're curious about what best practices you might develop in your own organization and how you might do it from a volunteer-centric way. So there's lots of ways to look at what we're going to talk about today, but I think let's get to it. So Marg and Heidi are here from Volunteering New Zealand, and I'm going to introduce them in a minute. But welcome, ladies. Welcome to the pod. So Margaret McLachlan is communications manager at Volunteering New Zealand. She has over 20 years experience in marketing and communications with local and central government and not-for-profit organizations. She's a volunteer matchmaker with the Community Comms Collective. Marg oversees our Volunteering New Zealand's communication strategy and much of the regular communication with their audiences, including newsletters, social media, and media liaison. She is passionate about using her comm skills to support volunteering and further the goals of Volunteering New Zealand. So welcome, Marg.
Thank you. Good to be.
And then Heidi is sector lead. She's worked in the voluntary sector for over 15 years, holding national volunteer manager roles across government and NGOs. At Volunteering New Zealand, she runs multiple projects, including their National Volunteering Mentoring Program and organizing their national conference. Heidi is passionate and driven about the volunteering sector and is happy to share her experience with others, be that as a keynote at an event, running a workshop, or a coffee catch-up. She is also an avid volunteer in her community, and both of you are fantastic people. It was so much fun to get to know you and spend time with you when I was there in January. So welcome to the pod. I love to start off our conversations with our guests about their volunteering birth stories, how they got involved, where they, how
they caught the bug of volunteering or volunteer engagement, the world of volunteerism. So let's start with either one of you. I want to hear from both of you, but how did you get into the world of volunteerism?
Oh, I'll kick off. Hello, welcome. This is my first podcast. It's quite exciting. I just want to point out we are unintentionally wearing the same colours for the people who are listening. Apparently this colour is called mulberry and we're just bizarrely wearing the same colour on the same day, but not to worry. It wasn't intentional, but it's quite cute, isn't it?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, the color is mulberry. Yeah,
Yeah, mulberry.
it's like so precise. It's like a purple. For those that are just listening, can't see the video on YouTube. It's like a purple, kind of
It's like
a
a
wine
burgundy
color, I would say.
Lovely. Oh, I like that. I approve of the word wine with clothing. Wonderful. I was thinking, Toby, as you read out my bio, I need to update that because it's actually 20 years now I've been in the voluntary sector. How scary is that? I'm actually getting really old. It's 20 years. And I got into the sector bizarrely 20 years ago. I have an environmental degree, science degree, and I needed to get experience to try and use my environmental degree. So I ended up volunteering for a conservation charity in Scotland, and my manager got pregnant, left to have a baby, and I got a paid maternity cover role. And when she came back, I was basically employed to work for them. So I was thinking as well, I volunteer in New Zealand. I've been here 6 years. I also got into this role through volunteering for VNZ. So I just wanted to make a point that you don't know what doors might open when you volunteer. So for my key pivotal career points in my life have come about from volunteering for the organisation I want to work for. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. That is so cool.
So I got into it. So cool. Yeah, so volunteering opens doors. Yay.
Yeah. Marg, what about you? How did you get into the volunteer world?
One of the pathways was through, I guess, skilled volunteering with the Community Comms Collective. It's an organisation that's been going in New Zealand now for over 10 years, and it matches skilled communications people with not-for-profits. So I joined, I guess, in a volunteer management role with my bio as a matchmaker to match those organisations with the volunteers who could help them with their skills. So that was part of the passion and development that I went through, and then I was lucky enough to join Volunteer in New Zealand about 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's like really aligned with what you do. You kind of know, because you do comms for a nonprofit, you can kind of quickly probably get to what a nonprofit needs and what skills that person has to offer.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real adjustment from coming from more of a corporate or government space to less money, but lots of willingness and ability to crack on, get stuff done.
Yeah. I would totally agree with that. The time in a corporate space, boy, talk about like the days and weeks it takes to get anything approved. In volunteer space, we just like write it up and put it out there. Hope for the best,
Yeah.
So why do you think, the other question I always like to kick off this pod with is, why do you think volunteering is important in today's world in particular? Certainly when there's a legacy of volunteering in New Zealand, but why right now should people be thinking about volunteering, or why should we be working on improving our volunteer best practices? So why is volunteering important now?
That's a really big question. And I think we could spend a podcast on talking about it. But I think for me, I heard someone recently say this at a conference, and I wrote it down because I liked it so much, especially for New Zealand with a small population. We've got about 5.28 million people. We are a small population, and that, I think, helps with community cohesion because we are smaller. And this person said, sorry, I can't remember their name, I'm going to quote, I think that volunteering binds our society together. It's the glue that binds us, especially in a country with such a small population. And also, as a side note, I think given what's happening in the world at the moment, volunteering gives us hope. It helps us create the community and the world that we want to live in. So I think it's a really important time to be involved in community action in some way.
My thoughts were, practically, it's a way of community organisations carrying out their work. Many rely on volunteers, or even an entirely volunteer run. Then that volunteers, of course, gain from the experience as well. They gain connection and meaning from the work that they're doing there, and maybe some skills development as well.
Yeah. I really think that volunteering has so many beneficiaries. Certainly the folks that volunteer, the organizations volunteers are supporting, the beneficiaries of that mission, whoever they are, whether they're direct service or
community members, people involved with that organization, or just local neighbors, and then the volunteers themselves, and then society as a whole. As you said, Heidi, it's really about cohesion and community. And, if you think about it, there's not very many, especially nowadays, people don't, in general, I'm not going to say broad brushstroke because I'm not sure this is true in New Zealand, but I don't believe people are finding as many opportunities to meet people who are different than them, who they don't meet through just workplace or their kids' school, or, I just feel like we're not as close together unless something intense happens in our neighborhoods or in our community. Would you agree that in recent years, it's harder and harder to build community, and volunteerism is a place where that can happen?
Yeah, I would
Absolutely
definitely
agree.
agree. There's
Yeah.
far less people are joining clubs or societies and they're not interacting in those third spaces outside the house or work with other
Mhm.
people who might be different from them. So yeah, I think volunteering really gives people an opportunity to mix and see other points of view.
Totally agree. And a lot of the community spaces have gone. They've been defunded or something's happened and not happening anymore. So there's a lot less places for people to congregate. Less people doing things like going to church for services, less youth clubs, that sort of thing happening across the country here. And I think that's happening around the world, really. And I also, this is my own opinion, I think social media has made people less social. I think
Mhm.
people are become a lot more introverted and stuck in their own little bubble sometimes, which is a real shame.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not always very social.
Oh, well, that is not.
Let's jump in and talk about Volunteering New Zealand for a minute. Give us a brief, so folks understand the context within which and your role within the country in terms of, why your organization stepped up and worked on the best practice. So give us a brief overview of the infrastructure for community involvement in New Zealand, because I think people may not understand that as well. And then what is the role of Volunteering New Zealand?
Sure. Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna refer to my notes so I don't miss any pertinent
No
points. So
worries.
we have over 115,000 not-for-profits in New Zealand, which is mind-boggling. The majority of them, about 90% of those 115,000 not-for-profits, are purely volunteer-led and run. There is also a network of 19 volunteer centres across the country, and community organisations are members of those centres. So people volunteer through these organisations in their community. And there's also lots of community organisations and groups that operate outside of that structure as well. Lots of more informal organisations are happening across the country, responding to community need. With your other question, what is the role of Volunteering New Zealand as an organisation? So we're a membership-based organisation. We have about 106 national member organisations, and 10,000 organisations sit underneath those national members. And we support them to manage and look after their volunteers well, consistently and safely. That's kind of, and Marg, did you want to add to that?
I'd add that our main roles are advocacy, research. We've just done a review of the last decade of the state of volunteering in New Zealand. We do a lot of training and we do promotion for things like National Volunteer Week. So we deal, one of our primary sort of audiences is volunteer managers, because they're so important as the kind of key conduit to effective volunteering. We also focus on smaller organisations where they might not have as much support
Yeah.
as the larger ones do.
So would you consider Volunteering New Zealand the peak body of
Yeah.
volunteering
Yeah.
so for folks in the US, I think Australia, New Zealand have the terminology peak bodies, and that's not really something in the US we have. So can you kind of explain really quickly what a peak body is, just so people can kind of get a sense of the infrastructure?
I guess it's just like the overarching organisations.
Mm-hmm.
The volunteer centres are part of the picture, but we're not their national body. They're separate organisations. So
Mm-hmm.
we are at the level, but we're actually formed by some of those volunteer centres and by others who are like, we need a national body to kind of advocate on our behalf to government, to funders, etc. 25 years ago, actually, we were formed in 2001, which was the first international year of volunteer, and then we now come around to the next one. So we're excited about that.
So
Yeah,
we're only
that's
25. Me too.
You haven't
Yeah.
been there since the beginning, no. So, but I think that's an example of people in community coming together and saying, like, look, we need this advocacy body, this peak body that advocates on our behalf, that can be more of an umbrella organization that doesn't necessarily run what we do, but serves as a support. And I think that's the distinction I think will help folks. Zealand, let's get into New Zealand's volunteering rates because I think they're really impressive. I mean, I know you all are like, trying to work to improve them, but based on the most recent general social survey data in New Zealand, 3% of New Zealanders volunteered. This is an increase from 50.7% in 2021. Volunteers contributed an average of about 18 hours over 4 weeks. Monthly, volunteers are contributing about 18 hours a month on average. What do you think is driving this depth of community engagement in New Zealand?
So it's partly to do with our history. The Māori were obviously the First Nations people here, and New Zealand was then, many people immigrated to New Zealand from about the mid 1800s. But the people who came were made a more egalitarian society than what they left behind in Britain, for example. So where helping your neighbour was the norm. You had to do that to sort of survive in a settler economy. And I think we have quite shared values across many of the cultures, though it does look slightly different perhaps between Māori or Pacifica people. But for many of us, I think it's just volunteering has just become sort of what we do as part of who we are, and it helps to bring us together.
And I think having emigrated here myself 15 years ago from the UK, I noticed it straight away. It's just way more civically engaged population, just way more involved in their community. And again, I think there's, well, to be blunt, less taxpayer base, less money, more gaps in community need. So we naturally fill the gaps with people to help us, to help whatever that means. But yeah, I mean, compared to the UK, it's just completely different concept of volunteering here. It's just part of their DNA, which I really love. It's just what you do. It's just what you do.
Yeah. I noticed that when this was my first trip to New Zealand, my first visit. And I did notice I spent some time going to museums and just learning about the history of the country. And, everybody's a newcomer because there was never even the First Nations folks who were the Maori who came first, there was no human life on the islands before that time. So, and I think that, and then, there were issues with people coming and colonization, etc. But over time, it's been a country of newcomers. I mean, I actually met somebody from the US we were in Christchurch at the Botanic Garden, and we were just walking around looking at the dahlias, and they were insane how many they have in their collection. And my husband and I are just like, wow, look at all the. And this gal came over and she said to me, hey, are you guys from the US? And we said, yeah. And she said, so am I. I moved here with my 2 sons because I wanted them to grow up in this environment, in this type of community. And so, one of the reasons I titled this podcast episode community, you use the term community spirit, because there really seems to be that community spirit. There seems to be, and I think as people come to the country, I think they absorb and create part of that. What do you think are the core values that are driving that community spirit? Obviously coming together, but you talked a little bit about collectivism, but what do you think are the values that are driving volunteerism?
Yeah, most people are motivated in some ways to give back to society. And it does look slightly differently, I think, across different cultural groups. Pacifica, for example, we have quite a large Pacifica population from the Pacific Islands, and they're very motivated by service. So they grow up the family who belong to the church, and they're just part of giving back. They're always helping others. In the Māori culture, hospitality and welcoming people to their spaces is very strong and still evidenced today. I mean, marae, which is the sort of homes in places that traditionally Māori have lived, but still quite actively involved in, for example, after disasters. They welcome people there to be sleep and to be fed, and people just would turn up and help in the kitchens or do whatever they needed to be done to help out.
Interesting. So let's talk about current challenges for leaders of volunteers and volunteering and what are the in the sector? Where are folks finding challenges? You've got a community that has values around collectivism, around supporting one another, around welcoming. You've got a huge, really impressive volunteering rates. You've got necessity. I mean, after I left, then we were trying to book this interview and there was, a cyclone coming through. And while I was there was a landslide due to weather. So the change in climate is really impacting communities. And I was seeing people come together to help out because it's just necessary. Like you said, Heidi, there's not always infrastructure readily available. And these types of events are not happening more rapidly than they used to in the past, as far as I understand it. So what are some of the challenges that you're seeing from leaders of volunteers that you're supporting and organizations you're supporting in the field?
Sure, I'll answer that initially. So, being sector lead, I regularly engage with our member organisations, so I hear about the challenges and things and the frustrations that they're having. So, there's a real distinct lack of uptake of technology to support, coordinate, and manage volunteers. It's really lacking. Even in our research over the last 10 years, our state of the decade reveals that's an ongoing issue. We often hear that organisations do not have enough volunteers. There's a growing trend for people to volunteer more informally versus through an organisation. And again, that's revealed on our latest data, the State Volunteering Report in 2024. I think it's about 40% of New Zealanders are volunteering informally, and it's about 27% are volunteering formally through an organisation. There's a real disconnect as well, where a lot of volunteering involving organisations are not quite evolving to meet those changing demands at the moment of volunteers. So there's a bit of a tension there.
And I think others who are listening from other countries may be saying to themselves, we have those same problems. The more I travel around, the more I see we're more alike than different.
Yeah.
The move towards more informal, more flexible volunteering roles, the continuing need for recruiting new volunteers, technology lags, those are all things that folks are struggling with globally. So it's so interesting that no matter what the infrastructure is or the resources or lack thereof is in a country, these are endemic sort of challenges around the world for leaders of volunteers. It just always blows my mind. It just seems like we would be different in some way, but we're not. We're not really different, which is in some ways a positive because we can help one another. Hence the best practice guidelines. So let's take a quick break. And after the break, we're going to get into our chat with Volunteering New Zealand and about the best practice guidelines, give you a little bit more detail, how they were developed, because I think there's a very distinct way that you went about it that I think people could benefit from learning from. And we'll get into it after the break. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Volunteering New Zealand. Hey, everybody. Have you subscribed to our Pro News weekly resource email yet? If not, why not? Each week you get a helpful article, a research insight, our latest podcast episode, and one practical tip you can use right away. Plus, when you subscribe, I'll send you a few helpful resources via email to take action and get some wins right away. So join 9,500 other leaders just like you who are upgrading their practices and making an even bigger impact. Visit volpro.net/newsletter-subscription. That's volpro.net/newsletter-subscription. And I hope to see you on the inside. Okay, we're back with our discussion with Volunteering New Zealand with Marg and Heidi to talk about the Volunteering New Zealand's new best practice guidelines. First of all, congrats, because I know that this type of work is, especially the way that you have involved stakeholders, is a long process.
Wow.
It takes a lot of patience and a lot of community building and a lot of sort of staying the course, right? Because it's easy to have scope creep and go off into different directions. But tell us a little bit about the history and the methodology of building these best practice guidelines. And what was the story? Why did you decide to undertake something like this when it is challenging?
Sure. So our previous best practice guidelines, because there was a previous version, were created in 2011. And I just remembered that I was involved in creating those previous guidelines. So they were looking a bit dated, a bit old. And also the ethos behind them, they were very organizational led, organizational focused. We wanted to flip it on its head. We wanted to put the volunteers right at the heart of the new guidelines. So really making that volunteer voice and that volunteer experience a whole part of those guidelines. And we wanted to also sort of make the perspective for more smaller organizations as well, because we know the majority of volunteer involvement organizations are not complex national organizations. They're small local responses, to make sure these guidelines really talk to those smaller organizations as well.
I love that you have pivoted towards a more volunteer-centric, volunteer-forward approach, and that you're acknowledging the reality that, 90% more or less are tiny organizations that don't have resources to do all of the things, that we're training on, that are like this entire infrastructure, that often there's a really actually a small group of organizations overall that can actually take on and implement all of these things, right? And the way that a smaller organization might approach volunteer engagement will be very different than a larger organization, and the types of concerns are just completely different. So how did you go about, what was the impetus to decide to do this now? You had a group, and you had a best practice guidelines from 2011. It's been a while. It's been a minute. Why right now did you say, you know what, we need to do this now? And then how did you involve stakeholders and get the process started?
So we look at statistics from using how people are using our website. So we knew they weren't being well used. They were also paper-based. So we just did a review of all our resources and realized these are just really dated. And it was a long time later.
Yes, we also did a survey with volunteer managers.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And, extraordinary, hardly any of them were getting any professional development at all in the past year. And we also asked them about what practices they really needed support on. And things like, we also were getting like phone calls from people saying problems with the exiting process. And we realized that, things weren't happening up front when people joined an organization to make their journey a better one. And so that when it came time to exit, they were prepared for that.
Totally. And how we went about sort of creating them, it was really fun, a really enjoyable process. We did a co-design process online, and we used a tool called Mural. I think it's a world platform now, which has a not-for-profit rate for using it. So volunteer leaders and volunteers from across the country came together to work on some draft guidelines. And then these worked really well. We captured input from across all different size organisations, from the whole sector and from volunteers. So researched other countries' existing best practices, and that helped us draw up these 7 key practice areas we wanted to embed in the guidelines. And we also wanted to build it on a volunteer life cycle model, which we saw was really popular and well respected across the world. So that's kind of how we started. But I can't recommend enough a co-design process. But basically online with digital post-it notes, 60 people in a virtual room. It was just fantastic, really engaging, really fun, and really creative. It worked really well for us, didn't it? Especially as a small not-for-profit, and being able to harvest that data from a platform really helped us.
We ended up with a huge amount of data, and actually sort of crunching it and distilling it down to just some key points and some key principles and some key ideas. Because the thing about it is it's non-prescriptive, really. It's like, these are things you could do. Here's some ideas. Here's some principles that you could apply. So yeah, it's a useful tool that people can adapt to their own needs.
So you used Miro, is that it?
That's another one, but we use Mural, which is MURL.
Mural. I'll link to that in the show notes. So did you do these facilitated conversations live, or did you put up a mural and say, go to the mural and post your ideas? And how did that work? Walk us through that.
Yeah, so we hired a project management specialist, understanding it wasn't in our own wheelhouse. So getting someone who's really experienced in running online co-design processes, and he managed those sessions. So he created basically, a bit like what's behind me, a graphic mural. And then people came in, were given some framing and some guidance and worked on certain questions and literally typed Post-it notes, which we moved around on the screen. It was like a live workshop, like what we did with you, Tobi, in January, but just a digital version. And it was nice in a way because you didn't have to speak if you didn't want to. So it was a good space for people with all different learning styles to come together and contribute in a way that was comfortable for them as well. And we gave them the project manager running the sessions. He gave them training on how to use the mural. We did a practice session where he came up with a little avatar and made it really fun and engaging. It was really cool. Yeah, it was highly worthwhile.
Did you have volunteers and employees, like paid staff, coming together? Did you do several sessions with smaller groups so it wasn't 60 people Post-it noting at the same time?
Yeah. I think we did about between 8 and 10 workshops in the end. And we tended to limit it to maybe 20 or 30 people ideally, just so everybody got a voice. But we managed it. It took a few months. It was, and apparently what it's called when you're taking the data out is called synthesizing the data. We did a lot of synthesizing because we had 50 some tens of thousands of words. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
We paid a contractor to synthesize the data where she removed duplicates and combined stuff, and it came up with the common themes and fitted under each of those practice areas. It was it was a really interesting exercise. I do recommend an online co-design process if it's something that's going to work for you.
Yeah. Did you set the tone, the intention around a volunteer-centric process, or did that bubble up from the facilitation?
A bit of both, really, because people registered, we knew who was coming in the room. So we knew if it was more volunteer-centric or we knew if it was more VI, volunteer involving organisations. And the project manager leading it would frame it to the relevant audience at the time. So speaking to the right audience in the right way was an important part of that journey, definitely.
Yeah, and I imagine a lot of the people who had roles as volunteer managers probably were wearing a lot of other hats as well.
Well, most volunteer managers also volunteer in their community in New Zealand as well, so it's pretty common. And a lot of, also probably why our rate of volunteering is so high, is the majority of volunteers volunteer for more than one organisation in New Zealand as well. So very civically engaged people, often paid to be volunteer managers and contributing as a volunteer in their communities. Gave us those two perspectives, which were really helpful in those sessions.
Yeah. So let's go into a little bit more in depth of the best practice guidelines. So what was the purpose, aside from having a set of standards, like just having the standards for standards' sake, what was the overall purpose, and who do you feel is benefiting or can benefit most from them?
Sure. So the guidelines are very much guidelines. We've made that really clear from the beginning. They're not prescriptive. We're not telling you what to do. We're telling you what you could do. There are guidelines, principles, and examples, and how to consistently manage your volunteers well. So volunteers themselves can also use the guidelines to help them understand what they can expect or what they should be expecting from their volunteer experience. They're a really useful advocacy tool. And the guidelines have tons of uses, but they're mainly used by volunteer managers involved in a volunteer involving community group or a more formal organisation. Also, they're also really, what we didn't know, the nice silver lining out of these guidelines has become a really useful advocacy tool for volunteer managers to actually advocate for their role, the importance of a volunteer manager, to get more resources, more respect, more appreciation by their organisation, realising and respecting that there are guidelines to support the sector because it's really important and it deserves guidelines and support to look after volunteers.
I heard a person who worked as a volunteer manager in a hospital, and she was like, in a hospital there are clinical guidelines, for every discipline. And for her to then say, well, actually, for the volunteers we have here are our guidelines, and here's how we've used the best practice guidelines to adapt to our situation, gives a real, elevation and support for the volunteer management role.
Yeah. And sometimes we know from our research and we know from anecdotal speaking to organisations, volunteer managers, they're often really isolated in their roles. They don't get a lot of professional development. And these guidelines can help them identify gaps in that volunteer life cycle in their organisation. And what I like as well is you can just dip into the practice area you need help with at the time. You don't need to do that whole review if you don't need to. So I do really like that they're kind of an on-demand guideline. You just use them as you need to at the time, which is kind of cool.
What are other ways your guideline? You did some literature review when you were in development, so you looked at other countries' standards and guidelines. What do you think makes yours unique? Obviously, the focus on volunteers, but is there something else that gives your best practice guidelines a different flavor than maybe others that you've seen?
Yeah, I think that they are quite unique. We referenced the literature review. If you Google volunteer management, there's just best practice. There's just millions of hits you'll get. But we found that it was only about 11 that actually had best practice proven worth, and we refined those a little bit to apply to our situation. I think that the whole value of them is as being a cycle, that the end, thinking that the exiting isn't that necessarily the end of the involvement with that person. Keep in touch with them. They might become your biggest supporter. They might be a donor. That when the time's right, they might be able to come back and support you again.
Yeah, I just jumped off a conversation with Ruth Leonard in the UK. She's one of our guest advisors in the Impact Lab. And we did a podcast episode on a discussion around volunteer offboarding and the fond farewell, and how the fond farewell, we're so focused on volunteer retention and keeping our retention numbers up that and sometimes we take it personally that people leave and have lives and they have other things going on. And we were talking about the alternatives of the way of thinking of an ending, and how we might think of an ending as maybe a good thing, and how we can keep connection in different ways. So most people don't even talk about offboarding.
Yeah.
It's not a common area of conversation, I think. It gets mentioned, but it's not. We focus so much more on recruitment than we do on offboarding. So let's go ahead.
I think exit's a normal, healthy part of volunteer life's journey. It's a reality. It's going to happen at some point, and that's okay.
Yeah. It's okay. That's right. It's okay. Well, let's focus on you have key pillars. You focus those pillars, as I understand it, on the areas where you knew there was proven practice, that there was research that had proven practice. Let's dip into a few of them. What are the 7 key pillars to begin with? And then maybe we'll pull apart 1 or 2 of them.
Sure.
And how do you structure them?
Sure. I'll read through them, so bear with me. So they're on that volunteer journey right from the very moment they hear about a volunteer opportunity right through to when they exit an organisation and all the steps in between. So the initial practice area on the cycle, if you go to our website, have a look at the life cycle model and how it all fits together. The first one's recruitment and onboarding. So what good looks like, clear role descriptions, accessible information, inclusive recruitment, why early volunteer experiences sets the tone. Number 2, so not really any, they can be in a different order. I'll just read them out in this order. Support, development and recognition. How ongoing training, leadership, support and recognition help retention and impact. The next practice area is impact and exit, celebrating volunteer impact with stories, data, recognition, thinking about volunteer transition beyond active service. And then, what are the other ones? There.
I think we've kind of rolled them
all together.
Yeah.
Together. So and then you've got how do organisations practically use the BPGs to strengthen volunteer involvement is embedded in there as well. So there are 7 distinct areas, and those 3 I mentioned it's all encompassed in those 3.
And they're in these 3 basic topic areas, but you have 7 specific best practice areas. Yeah. So how have you been rolling these out, and how are people using them to improve their practice?
Yeah, so we've really encouraged adoption of these BPGs initially by running some best practice guidelines 1-day workshops all across the country, so face-to-face with a learning and development contractor for us, delivering all over the country. Those have been really well attended, really well received. We've also been running short 2-hour sessions for organisations like volunteer centres, and I've been delivering those with a trainer-trainer model. So going along to a volunteer centre, running a session for them, for their community organisations for 2 hours on the BPGs, leaving the volunteer centre then to deliver it themselves. Like most of them are doing like twice a year, for example, those 2-hour sessions. And we're also running a free series of I run those 2 1-hour online sessions on each of the 7 practice areas. So our intention is to run that series of 7 every year. And those are free, open to anybody at all who wants to learn about a particular practice area. And we know they're really being well used because they've been accessed nearly 20,000 times on our website, which is pretty cool. So just being really well used. We hear a lot of anecdotal evidence as well from volunteer involving organisations of the value and how they're finding it almost like reassuring that those guidelines have kind of got their back, which is an interesting observation from volunteer managers.
Yeah, I think sometimes we need validation from outside our organization. Unfortunately, it just is what it is sometimes. And it helps to have, you've been beating the drum around, we need technology, or we need to figure out our exit strategy, or we need to figure out, and then, oh, here's the best practice guidelines, and oh, look, they are saying the same thing. Interesting, isn't it? So what are any examples of great practices or ways people have implemented these to make change? Do you want to share with folks?
Yeah, I've got an example. There's an organization called Bellyful, which is a nationwide charity that delivers meals to families who need a bit of extra support. They've got branches all across the country and all run by local volunteers. They've really embraced the volunteer guidelines, use them in many aspects of their work. For example, they introduced a new volunteer development program, which they called Filling Bellies, Filling Minds, which is quite good. And that's really to support their volunteer management, volunteer managers who, through leadership training, well-being tools, and practical skills as well. And they've told us that actually by running this program and by using the other aspects of the guidelines, it's really helped build connections between the volunteer managers, the volunteers, the whole structure of the organisation. There's a real sense of willingness and ability to buy into what the organisation is trying to do.
It's kind of nice to have a shared language, right?
Oh, totally.
And they're not, we're going to link to the BPGs in the show notes, but you'll see that they're not, they're purposefully, I think, I'm going to put this in, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like they're purposely inclusive in their language. Like you're not using a lot of jargon that only a volunteer manager would understand. I remember, when my husband and I first met, he came with me to a conference, a volunteer management conference. And he came out to dinner with some of us. And I go, well, how'd you enjoy the dinner? And he said, well, this is what I heard. Wah, 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 wah. He had no clue. He has a PhD. He's a scientist. Like, he's an academician. Like, how would he? No clue what we were talking about. Because everything was just jargon, 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 jargon. Similarly, when I go to science conferences with him and I go out to dinner with his science guys, that's what I hear. Wah, wah. But these guidelines are very approachable. They're very, like, anybody can understand what's being said and what the practice that's being described, I think. Would you say that was a purposeful thing? Was it hard to really, and I'm not saying that the language is dumbed down, because I think it's difficult to speak in plain language when you're immersed in a sector and in a profession that is full of acronyms. It's hard work to get something to a plain language space or place. Did you purposefully work on that, or are you just really good at communicating?
We did refine them after the first release and to make them more plain language. So that was something that we consciously set out to do. And I think another key thing we haven't mentioned yet is that alongside the guidelines on our website, there's curated set of resources that fit within each of those areas. So if you're looking, and we've again tried to make those very accessible, not long, wordy academic articles, but more, here's a template that you could use for signing someone up, or here's a business case that you could make for if you want to your organisation, if you need to get a volunteer management platform. So really practical tools that people can use as well.
I just want to give Marg a plug because her English is so clear. So for context, in New Zealand, I don't know, maybe you have this in the States, we have something called the Plain English Campaign. And every year they have national award ceremony. And we were nominated to be the best plain English website for the country. And I think we're in the top 3 in it. We didn't win, but we're in the top 3 for the country. That's pretty amazing. And the other two people were like government organisations and really had loads of budget. And we managed to do this on a smell of an oily rag with the Plain English Campaign lens over it. So we're pretty chuffed. And that's thanks to Marg's amazing Marg smithing, I call it. Her wordsmithing, we call it Marg smithing.
Marg smithing.
Being recognised as being really clear, but also not patronising. It's not belittling people's knowledge of the sector. It's just clear, easy to understand, and really digestible. We perhaps that's why they've been used so much, because they are really easy to use and digestible. So yay, Marg.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think words matter. And words can be exclusive or inclusive. Words can, like, as when we were doing our session, we talked about, building and breaking community. I think words and the way we communicate with others can build or break community, whether it's written word or spoken word. So I was really impressed with that. They felt there was a kind of ease about them, that it was like, oh yeah, I could give this a go, right? And I think for folks who are developing standards, whether it's for their organization or on a national level or regional level, whatever, I think looking at what y'all have done would be really helpful to folks. What do you recommend? What advice do you have for whether it's a country or an large enterprise level organization, or even a small organization, if they're developing standards for volunteer involvement or guidelines for volunteer involvement? What are your best tips? What works well? What would you say, don't try to do that because we tried it and it didn't work, or that this is going to be difficult? Beware of this.
So we were quite lucky in that what we decided to do worked really well. So our early experience is a positive one, and that was an online co-design process. So over 300 people contributed in some way through that process. So I think it's really important that you appreciate there needs to be sector buy-in for what you're doing. It can't come top down and be prescriptive and telling everyone what to do. You need to bring people on a journey with you, and whether that's a co-design process for you, or maybe it's practical in-person workshops for you, depending on the scale of what you're doing. But get that buy-in. Get people's voices across those guidelines and standards as well, because then it will really resonate with people if they hear and see themselves represented in those guidelines or standards as well. So get buy-in as soon as you can. Consult, speak to people, interview them, workshops, co-design, as much of that as you can. That's practical for your reality.
Anything else you might offer as advice? How long did the process take?
I think it was probably a good year from doing the survey, as I mentioned, to find out need, and then to the series of the sessions. We did the nuts and bolts, and then to real synthesizing and getting it. I mean, we did sort of post-session checks with some key people as well. So yeah, it was probably it was a good length of time. And I think the thing to say is we have kept evolving them as well. We haven't just static. We've reviewed them. We keep adding the resources that support it. We've done this training and keep tweaking how we're offering that. So yeah, they're not a static thing. We're evolving.
They're alive.
They're alive. Did you send out to all stakeholders who'd had input? Did you send them out a draft and say, here's where we're thinking, any other feedback do y'all have?
I think we did that.
Yeah.
And the good thing with the Mural tool we used, I should get commission from Mural for this, but you own the data for a matter of time afterwards, so people could go back into Mural and add stuff. We had a slightly different part of the process for further along the line of the synthesization. That was really helpful as well. So it made it so easy because people could respond on their phone, or just really, really, really straightforward and really engaging. People enjoyed the process. I think it was really, we were well attended throughout because we made the process engaging and fun.
Yeah, that's rare to hear for projects like this, that it's fun. Right? Most people are like, no, it's not fun. It's analysis to paralysis. That's what it feels like. Like,
Yeah.
if there's not momentum. I mean, I think a key takeaway is to hire a professional facilitator to help you.
Yeah, totally.
I think another key takeaway that I'm learning is to have some type of value-based sort of guiding star, which yours was keep the volunteer at the center of the process. Another value is using plain language. So that's a focus or practice. There's some real key takeaways here that I think the audience, if they're interested in developing standards, whether it's again for their organization or on a national level or regional level, that are really helpful and really sound. Did you all, was there anything that you did that you thought, you know what, or was there, let me ask this because I'm curious about it. Were there any things that surprised you about the themes that bubbled up in terms of, you ended up with 7 best practice areas. Did any of these surprise you? Did you think like, wow, I didn't think that would come up, or oh yeah, or that we're confirming, like, of course this would. I mean, I imagine recruitment would come up.
I think for me, because I was in those co-design sessions as well and managing registrations, but the lack of interest in coming to the exit session was really interesting because, and having learned from having delivered best practice guidelines workshops now, so we're having conversations, and part of those workshops, you're supposed to work on practice area 7, which is exit. No one wanted to do it. And it seemed to me that the sector is a little bit afraid to learn about exiting volunteers because they want to hold on to volunteers forever and ever and ever. Because that was really interesting. There was a lack of buy-in to that part of the life cycle. And that's even an ongoing issue now as well. Still, people not confident in how to exit because they don't want to lose volunteers. They're holding on to them forever.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't plan purposefully, you're not going to do succession planning. There's so many reasons. And if it's not done well, I always think about this. And I was talking about this with Ruth. How do you want people to remember their volunteering? Because they're going to leave your organization at some point. And we remember first impressions, and we remember beginnings and endings more than anything as human beings. And so they will remember. And do we want our volunteers to feel like, oh, well, you just, you got deleted from our VMS, our volunteer management system. Goodbye. Don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out. I mean, come on. We were talking about this on the other podcast. I was laughing about it. Like, giving, people, like I said to Ruth, people are with you for a reason or a season. It's okay to give people the gift of goodbye, or for them to give you the gift of goodbye. And if you are really doing this with care and compassion and really acknowledging volunteers for what they've contributed, whether it's a very small amount or a lot, that in the end, you are creating these ambassadors who are going to speak about your organization and and probably going to donate to you financially if they have the means. And anytime anybody, what about this organization, or where should we're pooling our money for a family. We're going to, our family used to pool money every holiday season, and we would choose together as a family which organization we wanted to give our money to. And, if people know your organization and had a fond farewell, you're going to come up in that conversation.
Yeah. And the organizations, so for context, I did a bit of work in the past with Salesforce, which is quite a complex IT CRM, customer relationship management platform. And we were using it in my government role at the time to manage volunteers. It's not perfectly designed for it, but Salesforce and Blackboard as well, another CRM, it has a volunteer portal and a donor portal already built into CRM because they distinctly understand that if someone's a volunteer, it's very likely at some point they'll be a donor. They recognize that, and it's built into a multi-billion-dollar platform. I think that's really interesting, that we need to appreciate that someone leaves your organization, they will become an advocate for you if they had a good experience. They'll tell potentially hundreds of people about their volunteer experience with you. And if they can't volunteer for you anymore, at some point, it's very likely they will donate to in some shape or form. So I thought that was really interesting, though, about those CRMs, knowing that they understand that dynamic better than the sector does.
Well, I think active volunteers are already donating, whether it's in kind. I remember we used to do letter writing campaigns, and the organization would say, well, let us know, we can reimburse you for the postage, or do you need us to give you stamps? And we were like, no, I'll donate my stamps. I remember, facilitating strategic planning sessions for that are, I charge a lot of money for, that for the organization that I love and I support, I was going to do that for free. And I did it for our board that I was part of. And I did it 3 years later when the next board came along and said, you know what, could you come and do this again? Well, of course I can, And so people are contributing to our organizations their time and talent, but they're also contributing their financial, either in kind or making cash donations. And they're often making it while they're volunteering. And I think organizations also really hesitate to make that ask. They're like, oh, they've done so much already. Are you finding that with folks that transition to making an ask of a financial contribution, maybe at the end of volunteering, is a barrier for folks, a mindset block of, well, we shouldn't be asking volunteers for money?
It's not something we ask the sector, but it's something we probably should be when we do volunteer manager surveys about that. It's not something we've been covering, really, is it? I think it's something to look into for us.
Probably part of the New Zealand culture would be, oh, I don't want to ask, them for more.
Yeah. Marg, was there anything that came up in these best practice guidelines that surfaced that surprised you?
I think one thing we haven't mentioned is that we do frame them up front with values, and they are words in Te Reo Māori, our First Nations language, and I think they are very important to sort of set the tone. So it's about, before you sort of dive into the practice, it helps you to think about what am I trying to achieve here with my volunteers, with my organisation, and for the community, to make the world a better place, because that's what we're really
Yeah. So folks can go online, and I'll link to in the show notes, can go read those values as well that are undergirding these best practices. I think that grounding is also super smart because it's showing a kind of purposeful intention that these aren't just simply the practices or ways we go about managing volunteers or leading volunteers, but there's also a big why to this.
Yes.
There's a bigger reason why we've chosen these practices and how they roll up into the values that we want to live as organizations. So I think that's a really important thing to call out and say, we're including both of these. This has been a really good conversation, ladies. Thank you so much for joining me. I think it's late here and early there, right? The next day.
Yeah, it's 10:12 a.m.
Yeah, 6:12. It's not too late here. But yeah, it's always fun to try to schedule these calls when we're halfway around the world. But this has been really fun, and it was so much fun to be there in New Zealand and making, that was another way. Having me come was another way you were helping with the adoption of these best practice guidelines. We did journey mapping, so we took every step of the volunteer journey from first touch to fond farewell, and we had folks putting Post-it notes on and really mapping out and thinking about, are the best practice guidelines reflected in this journey, and what are ways specifically, concretely, people could. And there were so many great ideas that came up, I think, in that day. And I'd never really done it usually I do this work with an individual organization. So it was an amalgam of ideas that came together. And I just felt like, I don't know what happened afterwards, but I felt like there were a lot of really good ideas that were coming forward.
Well, that's the thing we find. The people already have the ideas and then the willingness, and they're already doing a lot of great things. It's just a matter of kind of drawing it all together and making it work in practice.
And cross-pollinating. We took photographs of the final murals, and y'all sent them out to everybody, so people could refer back when they needed some ideas. So it was fun. It was fun. So this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. It was so fun to get to know you both, and I hope I'll see you again sometime in the future. I know it's a long way away, whether you're here in the U.S. or I'm there in New Zealand. Hopefully we can get together in IRL, in real life. But one last question as we wrap up for both of you, each of you. What are you most excited about in the year ahead?
Well, it's our 25th anniversary because we're only 25. So that's a big deal. So we're hoping to host a celebration event. And I'm sort of pushing it to be like a cocktail, canapes, drinkies, nice celebratory event with guest speakers, potentially at an important government representative's house. Are we allowed to say that? I don't know. Governor General's house, which is a beautiful, beautiful stately home. So that's one thing we're hoping to do. But also, we've got IV26.
Yeah, we're really supporting International Volunteer Year 26. We've chosen our theme, I think, similar for our National Volunteer Week, which is in June, of your year to volunteer, which I think a few countries are doing that. So that's always that month for us of June is always an exciting and fun time when you see lots of celebration and recognition of volunteers. So yeah, it'll be another busy year.
Yeah, for a tiny team. Go you. It's always like, I love what you're doing. Let us know. I know we'll post things in the show notes, but how can people learn more about your work and get in touch with you if they're interested? Just tell me. We'll share some links in the show notes, but what are ways to get in touch?
Yeah, probably the best way is our website, volunteeringnz.org.nz. There's heaps of information laid out there. And yeah, we really welcome any approaches or questions. And there's the contact form there as well.
Excellent. And folks, you can go the Volunteering New Zealand best practice guidelines, the value statements, all of that is on the website, free for you to look at and download. It's all very helpful information. So I really encourage you all who are listening, if you want to see how folks do it around the world, if you want to see how best practice guidelines were built from the ground up, from grassroots to grass tops, with a real community spirit, best practice guidelines at Volunteering New Zealand are definitely ones to look at. So I really encourage you to do that. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank Marg and Heidi for being my guests this week. And if you liked us, go ahead and give us some 5-star ratings. I'm just asking. It helps us build the knowledge about the podcast and reach more people. And if you think somebody could benefit from listening to the pod, please share it with your friends or colleagues and join us next week. Same time, same place on the Volunteer Nation. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Toby.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Volunteer Nation podcast. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review so that we can reach more people like you who want to improve the impact of their good cause. For more tips and notes from the show, check us out at tobijohnson.com. We'll see you next week for another installment of Volunteer Nation.